Dishonored is a game that stands out as one of the most unique action adventures out there. It's won multiple video game awards and is commonly recognised as the best game of 2012, a time where a lot of great games were coming out. This also means that Dishonored is turning 10 this year. I know, we're all getting old. I want to explore and critique the aspects of this game that made it so unique and well loved, and unfold why it was such a success. I have a personal love for Dishonored and have played through multiple times, with each playthrough as enjoyable as the last. I do want to preface this video by stating that I'm not a video game developer or expert in any sense. I just want to offer my own experience with this game. I should also mention that I'll be covering the DLC as well as the main game in this video, so let's dive into it, starting with the story. So as with any video game story, there will be spoilers here. So if you haven't played this game in the 10 years it's been out and you want to go ahead and do that, I'd highly recommend it before coming back to this video. To summarise then, Dishonored is your classic revenge story. Corvo returns early from scouting a cure for the rat plague that is taking over the continent. Upon his arrival, the Empress is murdered by internal conspirators. Corvo is framed for this, arrested and thrown into prison to await execution. Months later he is freed from prison by a group of loyalists who want to restore the throne, and you fit into this team as the assassin. During a dream you are granted supernatural abilities by a deity called the Outsider, and are then tasked with eliminating conspirators one by one to save the true heir Emily and restore the throne. Greed eventually takes over as the loyalists you're working with realise they're close to power, and Corvo is betrayed for a second time, after which time he comes back in one final step to overthrow the loyalists and save Emily. Now, there's a lot more to it than this, but really best to explore it for yourself. It's not reinventing the wheel, and on the whole is fairly predictable. However, the story is well executed and is fleshed out further due to the intricacies of the setting it takes place in. Set in a Victorian era city during a rat plague epidemic, Dunwall is far from its usual norm. The city is starving to death and plague victims line the streets. Social divide has been exaggerated by this conflict, but everybody is still living in close proximity, leading to violence. The aristocracy are relatively safe and looked after in their homes, and have access to a substance called Sokolov's elixir, which subdues the effects of the plague. And, as you can probably guess, the rest of Dunwall don't have access to this. Well, unless you count the Bottle Street gang who managed to make a bootleg version. Just don't tell them that I poisoned it. These social class differences are no better highlighted than in the Boyle Mansion level. I mean, just look at the stark difference between each half of this map. Need I say more? The storytelling itself is done through various methods including cutscenes, dialogue, in-game notes and some visuals. The more you explore, the deeper the story you're ultimately exposed to. You still get a complete story without necessarily exploring that much, so it's really up to the player on what sort of experience they're after. But having said that, you're really selling yourself short if you don't try to explore every nook and corner that Dunwall has to offer. It feels like a game meant to be explored. You are supposed to take your time, and when you do, you are rewarded with unique interactions, side quests, smaller stories within the world that really help to gel the whole thing together and make it feel like a real gritty and struggling world. Wouldn't be a Dishonored video without talking about lore. This game is absolutely packed full of it everywhere you look. The world building that was done is genuinely mind-boggling, and similar to the story, the more you explore, the more lore you're ultimately exposed to. Now, there's a lot going on here, and there's no chance I could ever cover it in one video, let alone in just a section of one video. But virtually everything you come across in Dishonored has some explanation of its purpose and why it exists. The Outsider is definitely one of the biggest contenders here. He is responsible for granting Corvo, amongst a select few others, the powers and abilities that you use during your time here. He's a very interesting character and does have an origin story which, I'm fairly certain you can find as books and notes during the game, but he isn't overly explained, at least in the first game, and you kind of take his presence for what it is. I like this because it's up for your interpretation as the player. Stemming from this outsider, you have the Abbey of the Everyman, a religious order in the Dishonored world who stand firmly against the outsider. So already we have a powerful deity, almost godlike character, and a religion amongst everything else that's going on. Once you have thoroughly explored the game, all these characters, groups and factions become so fleshed out that it almost feels like Dishonored is part of a long-standing series, not a standalone game that it was. The world itself is notably vast. Dunwall is just one part of a larger continent amongst other continents and unique places that, despite never actually visiting, are so prevalent in the game's notes and lore that it almost feels like you've been there. Even collectibles such as runes and bone charms have a distinct lore behind them, but more about these in the gameplay section. I want to make a special mention about the atmosphere and ambience in this game because it's really important. A good atmosphere needs to immerse you in the world, because if you're not immersed then there isn't really anything at stake. Dishonored does this spectacularly well with its choice of sound palette. Subtle noises like soft wind, distant dog barking, white noise, creaking metal are overlaid with occasional string instruments, synths, voices, glassy tones and ethereal sounding phrases. The louder world noises of each level fits in with this, like the sound of the walls of light, the guards patrolling, the foghorns of distant ships down the river, or the fireworks from the Boyle Mansion. The ambience very much complements each level. It's purposeful but not intrusive. You can shut your eyes and just listen to the ambience and pretty much know what sort of environment you're in, whether this be a mansion of the aristocracy or the dingy flooded streets of Dunwall. If you truly let this game take you to where it wants to take you, you will have a fantastic, memorable experience of this world that's been created here. Now, I honestly find the atmosphere and world of Dishonored quite cosy. It has a distinct lived-in feel. You are free to explore and traverse this world, out of sight of enemies, watching, surveying, listening, and alone with just your own thoughts. I've seen forum and Reddit discussions highlighting this exact same thing, and it goes beyond nostalgia. The atmosphere of Dishonored truly embraces you in a big warm hug, pulls you into its rich detailed world so much that it almost feels safe. I'm happy to spend hours here, exploring, taking my time and just soaking it in, and for me at least that's what gaming's all about. I want to make a special mention here about Corvo's dialogue on Dishonored. There isn't any, at least audio dialogue. Corvo doesn't speak at all during the entire game. You do choose some dialogue options during cutscenes and NPC interactions, but that's it. This was changed for the sequel, but there's something I find quite immersive and peaceful about it. You feel like a truly silent assassin. Corvo's voice is up to your interpretation as a player. Now, I know some people will like this and some would prefer that Corvo had a voice. Clearly the developers felt conflicted on this issue too, with the addition of a voice actor for later games. I don't know. If anybody knows more about this, then do leave a comment because I'm genuinely curious about it. It's no secret that Dishonored is a visually stunning game. The steampunk oil painting style that they've chosen to represent this world looks polished and beautiful everywhere you look. If you stay still long enough, you feel like part of a painting. The benefits of an art style like this is that it is essentially future-proof. Dishonored looks just as visually appealing now as it did upon its release in 2012. This is common amongst games that use a unique art style. Think Borderlands, Journey, Limbo, Don't Starve, Firewatch. These games are timeless, and the visuals always feel fresh no matter when you go back to them. Now this is not to say that titles that focus more on graphic fidelity and realism are obsolete after a few years. Some of my favourite titles of all time use a realistic graphic style, but there's no denying that they do tend to age quicker. These visuals are enhanced by the skyboxes. I mean seriously, these skyboxes are some of the best I've seen. Just look at the Rothwild Slaughterhouse level, the first of the DLC maps. You begin with a brief cutscene and then you walk on this narrow catwalk towards the main level with your view hidden by these narrow walls. But when you get to the end of this catwalk, your field of view widens and you're encapsulated with this glorious warm orange sunset. It's stunning and projects a warm saturation on the entire map. You can almost feel the warmth on your face. It feels so true to life and gives such a unique atmosphere to this level. Contrast this to the skybox and lighting of a level such as the Flooded District. Here we have a thick, oppressive mix of greens and dark greys, with faint spots of sunlight trying to break through. There isn't as much lighting reaching the buildings here, so they appear much more murky, suffocating, and a bit more washed out. It really tells a story of the desolation and fear taking place here without even saying a word. Moving on to the gameplay and level design aspect of Dishonored then, the first things to mention would be the two main methods of completing this game, namely high chaos or low chaos. High chaos, as you would expect, is killing everything in your path. There are no holds barred here, no restrictions, whereas low chaos is playing through much more reservedly, avoiding conflict where possible and finding unique opportunities to eliminate important enemies in creative ways. I would thoroughly recommend playing through Dishonored in both styles, as each offers its own unique narrative, despite low chaos being quote unquote the canon ending. You might assume that one playstyle would be stealthy and one would be loud by the implication of low and high chaos. However, this isn't necessarily true. You can still have a high chaos playthrough playing stealthily, provided you use lethal takedown methods. Likewise, you can blunder through the game getting spotted by absolutely everything and still get a low chaos ending provided you restrain yourself from killing. You can even do a mix of both if you like, and see what ending the game gives you. Of course, things can change in the game depending on which style you choose. Playing in high chaos can affect things in the game which playing in low chaos doesn't. For example, you get more weepers playing in high chaos. These are the plague victims that are in the final stages of the virus. NPCs will act differently towards you, generally more aggressively and negatively. The world adopts the high chaos setting that you sculpted for it and chucks it back at you through this playstyle. The world becomes more brutal and, you guessed it, chaotic as you go through the levels. Conversely, playing through on low chaos has the opposite effect. NPCs are more hopeful, kinder, more respectful towards you, though this isn't as immediately obvious without the high chaos to compare it to. Take the trip to the final level for example. After the culmination of your playstyle throughout the entirety of the rest of the game, Samuel the boatman will either wish you all the best or tell you to get the hell out of his boat. There's a lot of NPC interaction in this level and other levels that is ultimately dictated through your playstyle. I personally really enjoy games that use this kind of narrative. I'm involved, my choices matter, everything has consequences. Back on the subject of stealth versus loud, Dishonored levels are designed coherently around every playstyle. There is always an option open to you to complete your objective, whether you go straight through, stick to the rooftops, unlock other avenues through side quests. You can even possess a rat and sneak through a lot of areas unnoticed that way. It's completely up to you. Every time I come back to the game I end up finding an alternative route somewhere that I'd never noticed before. The city of Dunwall appears sprawling and full of hidden passages and routes. It's really quite good. I would go as far to say that some levels in Dishonored feel genuinely open world. The objectives in this game are technically linear in the sense that you are eventually guided towards a certain target. However, there's a lot of non-linear gameplay going on here in the routes and methods that you can use. Corbo's abilities also grant you freedom of choice too. While some abilities are obviously intended for a high chaos playthrough and some intended for a low chaos playthrough, there is an overlap to it. Certain abilities can be used for both playstyles like blink and freeze time for example. These abilities are unlocked using runes which are scattered around in each level. Sometimes they are simply hidden away for you to find, and sometimes they may require a side quest or a certain ability to get access to. Some abilities cost more runes than others and use more mana than others, presumably based on how powerful the developers felt they were. The improved variation of freeze time is extremely powerful, no matter what style of play you use, and is subsequently expensive on runes. A simple agility upgrade, however, is relatively cheap. I will say that I think they got the balance largely right here, but I do personally find myself using a similar set of abilities over others. Not because there's anything necessarily wrong with them, but they just don't fit into my playstyle or don't interest me. The rat swarm for example kinda just felt like a cheap easy kill for me, so I never used it. But I'm also the kind of person who enjoys a stealthier style of play anyway. The bone charms you found around the game also give unique, albeit small buffs to certain elements of Corvo, whether that be your base movement speed, damage, how much potions heal you, your rate of mana use, etc. They don't massively affect gameplay, but the right combination of them can prove useful for certain playstyles, and I think that they were a good addition to have alongside the runes. One aspect of Dishonored's gameplay I would critique a bit is the takedowns. There are significantly more ways to kill your opponent than there is to subdue them. Think of stealth takedowns. All there really is to do is choke your opponent out or sleep dart them, and this was a bit of an oversight considering the canon ending being orientated around non-lethal gameplay. I don't mind it too much, but some people will get impatient and bored going around choking everybody just to get this ending. This was something that was addressed in Dishonored 2, so at least that was rectified there. You might think then that all these gameplay and level design aspects would lend itself to Dishonored being a thoroughly replayable experience, and you'd be correct. No two playthroughs are ever the same, and you'll always find new hidden areas you didn't know existed, new paths to your objective. It really is a triumph in this regard. The pacing is also pretty good too. Most missions have a hub section in between them, the Hound's Pit's pub. I quite like the pub sections. It feels like a good relief from the main missions for you to gather yourself, but it doesn't feel too long that I'm bored clicking through endless dialogue waiting to get back to the main gameplay. Each time you come here, the characters all have new things to say, collectibles are in different places and new items are available from the shop, so there are things to do. The pacing here is largely up to the player on how much they want to explore before diving back in. In the main missions the pacing is also decent. It's never overdone or boring, apart from maybe the choke takedowns, but you know. You usually have enough rooms to unlock a new ability on each level to try out, so this keeps things interesting, as well as the multiple path level design, and the addition of some new enemies like Dowd's assassins. It's challenging getting to this late stage of the game having mainly fought guards to now encounter these enemies that have some magic abilities too. In the DLC, you'll also encounter witches which will throw you off even more when you first come across them. If I'm being critical here, there are some areas where the replayability and pacing is a bit poorer. The final level, for example, was a bit anticlimactic to what I was expecting. Sailing up to King Sparrow Island and seeing the monolithic structure of the lighthouse high in the air was an impressive intro, but once on the island, the level here felt a bit rushed and short compared to some of the masterpiece missions that came before it. The final cutscenes and drama that takes place at the top of the lighthouse is great, but it means less when it only takes about 10 minutes to get here. This may just be me here, but despite the stunning visuals, I also found the Royal Physician level that takes place along Coldwind's Bridge a little bit tiresome in parts, mostly in the middle sections. They felt a bit linear compared to the rest of the game, but this kind of makes sense if you're going across a bridge, so I'll forgive it that. The highlights for me were definitely the High Overseer Campbell mission at the beginning, the Lady Bull's last party mission, and the Flooded District. These three levels really portray what Dishonored was all about. All these unique gameplay and level design aspects glued together so coherently. I could talk all day about what I love about these missions, but this video is long enough already, so let's just say if you know, you know. Now, it wouldn't be a complete Dishonored video without discussing the incredible Dowd DLC. Both the Knife of Dunwall and the Brigmore Witches are really strong entries here, and another warning for spoilers, because I'm going to tell you the story now. You're now playing as Dowd, the assassin from the main game, who's haunted from his past, hunting for a woman named Delilah, who takes you all over Dunwall, eventually culminating into stopping a witch coven, enacting a haunting ceremony to essentially control Emily from the inside to take the throne. Dowd, the same man who murdered the Empress, literally saves Emily from a living death. How is that for perspective and storytelling? It feels like its own standalone game and fulfills all the requirements of a great DLC. It isn't necessary to play this to understand the first game, you don't have to buy it, but it fills in a major and very rewarding story gap if you do. It's perfectly done. There's a unique character perspective here. Dowd is perceived generally as a disliked antagonist during the main game, but now being put in his shoes, things become a lot more interesting and muddied in this DLC. The world is suddenly expanded far beyond the core story, immersing you even more in its thick treacle-like lore. The rat plague struggles are even more pronounced. People are being forced out of their homes. All this is going on at the same time as Corvo's story too. Look at these examples from the Rothwell Slaughterhouse level. There's even dialogue and announcements about it.
This is a public warning. Corvo Atana, the assassin and one-time royal protector, has escaped from confinement and is at large within the city.
I find this so cool, as I wasn't even thinking about any of that when just playing the main story as Corvo. You kind of forget about Dowd after you see him murder the Empress at the beginning, and don't see him again until you get to his hideout. but he's actually been on his own quest saving Emily the entire time.
Clever.
I almost had you, Dowd.
There's a slight variation of powers here too. For example, Dowd's blink power stops time as well. This is the story element itself. It shows that not everybody is granted the exact same powers. There's some variation depending on your personality. I prefer playing as Corvo just because I love Corvo, but I can't deny the polish and perfection of Dowd's arsenal and levels. They are at least on par with Corvo's gameplay and level design, or perhaps even a step up. Going back and playing through the main game after completing the DLC gives you a whole new perspective and offers even more replayability. You might think a little differently now when you encounter Dowd at his base once you've played his side of the story.
So my life is in your hands. Make your choice.
Dishonored is a game that for me exemplifies what a first-person action adventure is all about. It's endlessly replayable and so rich with lore and content. Each aspect of the game I've talked about here could be a full video essay just in and of itself, and it's really difficult to cover everything in one video that contributes to make this game as good as it is. If you still haven't played Dishonored, or you haven't been back to it for a good while, give it a play. You'll be pleasantly surprised on what a breath of fresh air this game still is in 2022. Every game is ultimately a sum of its parts, and each building block for Dishonored just works. The visuals, atmosphere, setting, gameplay, level design. It's this shining example from an era where games felt like they had so much more soul and hard work grafted into them. So that's where I'm going to leave this video. I truly hope you enjoyed it. This was a passion project for me, and I do plan to do similar style videos for other games that I love, and perhaps even games that I dislike too. If you could consider liking this video, subscribing to my channel and leaving a comment below on your experience with Dishonored. Perhaps you have something to add that I missed, or want to comment on something I've said. I love discussion, so don't be shy. With that said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.
Somewhere around here. I'm not doing it.
That's enough.